All right, I think we're going to go ahead. We're 1 o'clock on the dot, and so we're going to get started. So welcome to the EduScape Talk and Tour series. Obviously, this is a virtual event. We're here online together, and our tour will be virtual. But hopefully, you'll take advantage of, after you've had the talk today, listen to the talk and then gone through the tour, that you'll take advantage of going actually to the UGRA building and observing the EduScape demonstration landscape for yourself. If you're not familiar with what EduScape is all about, it is an award-winning demonstration landscape that contains numerous examples of conservation and water detention techniques. It all began when UGRA, Upper Guadalupe River Authority, decided that they needed to correct some major erosion and runoff issues around their building. But they didn't want it just to be, just correct these things. They wanted it to be a teaching tool as well. So they enlisted the expertise of our local master gardeners and to help design this landscape and to alleviate the issues of the erosion and such. And so it became a wonderful educational and demonstration tool. And we like to say that it's a landscape with a purpose. So Riverside Nature Center got into the mix as well, partnered with UGRA to help promote the EduScape in a educational standpoint. So we developed this Talk and Tour series to highlight several of the techniques that are demonstrated in the landscape. So today, our talk is going to feature some key information regarding residential irrigation systems. And here to guide us through this topic is Travis Pflughaupt, and he is the owner of Beyond Irrigation, and he is a licensed landscape irrigator. Travis, did I just butcher your last name?
Oh, you did really well.
Okay, okay. So, as you'll learn, Travis has a direct connection to the EduScape. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Travis. But before we do that, just a couple housekeeping details. Down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat icon. You can use that throughout the program to ask a question. And what we're going to do is hold questions until the end of the presentation, and we can go through the chat, and that's just kind of a mental reminder for you, or jot them down, and then we'll open mics at that time, and we can have a free flow of Q&A. So also, just so that you know that this presentation is being recorded, and so I'll send to you a link for the, you can, download the recording if you've got a friend you want to show it to, or you missed a part, couldn't stay throughout the whole thing, or what have you, that will be available. You will also receive in that same email with the recording link is a link to a survey. And so we'd really appreciate if you wouldn't mind taking just not even 2 minutes it takes to fill out the survey and give us some feedback on the presentation and program. So without, any more of me talking away, I'm going to click out and turn it over to Travis. And so take it away, Travis.
All right. Well, thank you, Becky.
Very.
All right, guys. Well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you to each of you that have come on board this afternoon for this Talk and Tour talk. And I'm very grateful to be welcomed into your homes, your offices, or wherever you're joining me right now. And just very honored that I was presented with the opportunity through both UGRA and Riverside Nature Center to come alongside what they're doing and talk a little bit about irrigation. And I'm excited about it. This is just a small disclaimer, my first time using the Zoom platform in this way. So bear with me as I navigate through any potential challenges that may come with that. But I want to be as thorough as I can be while delivering some practical, hopefully helpful information for you regarding your own irrigation system, or maybe one you're considering doing if you don't currently have one. So yeah, without further ado, I want to go ahead and dive on in. Titled today's presentation, Conservation Through Irrigation and Some Water-Wise Practices for the Texas Hill Country. And I'm assuming most of our audience, if not all, is here in Kerr County or relatively counties that would border Kerr County and classify as a Texas Hill Country. So most of what we're going to cover is going to be applicable beyond the Hill Country technically, but we're going to dive into some more specific stuff related to the terrain here that presents a little bit more challenges when it comes to irrigating. So I wanted to start just with kind of a common issue that we see a lot in the field. And maybe this will make some of you feel better about your own system or some challenges that you've encountered or have helped others navigate. But a lot of people, and this is not a knock against anyone, but there's really not a very good understanding between what a start time is and what a run time is. And most controllers for an automatic irrigation system are going to have some kind of language. Usually it does say start time or run time. Generally it's to the right of your dial as you're facing 12 noon. Probably about 1 o'clock, you'll hit what's called the start time. Go to maybe 3 o'clock and you'll hit run time. So the start time, all that is when you're telling your system, whether you have one zone or 10 zones, when you want it to come on. So let's say you want it to water at 6 in the morning, then you would go to start time on your controller, set it for 6 a.m. and you're done. Zone 1 will come on and it'll progress all the way through number 10. Your run time is where you're telling each individual zone how long you would like it to perform or run for. And so that's where you're going to break it out by zone, number of minutes that you'd like it to run for, whether that's 10, 15, 20, whatever that number is. You make those decisions there on the runtime function. And I'll tell a quick story with one of our clients that we serviced maybe a month ago now. She called me saying that she had an issue and none of her heads were performing correctly. Like water would just trickle out of all of her heads, and I think she had close to 12 zones on her system. And when I came to troubleshoot, what I found was that she actually had programmed 4 different start times, one for 2 a.m., one for 2:30 a.m., one for 3, and one for 3:30 a.m. And so what was happening is zone 1 was coming on correctly at 2 a.m., but then at 2:30, zone 1 was coming back on when zone 2, 3, et cetera, was trying to run. So all of these zones were trying to tap into the same water supply because she had 4 start times. And because of that, none of them would function optimally. So the simple correction for her was eliminating start times 2, 3, and 4, getting her to just the 1. And then her run times were fine, but that fixed everything. And she couldn't believe it. So it really can be that simple sometimes, just knowing the difference between your start time and your run time and what their purpose and function is as it relates to your system. So here's just a couple of pictures. Rainbird hunter, pretty well known in the irrigation industry. If you look on the picture on your left, the Rainbird controller, the dial is actually facing the start time function. And then just beyond it, it says set station runtime. So those are the 2 functions I'm talking about on your controller. And on the right, the Hunter X Core, it's not as visible, but currently the dial is in the run position or the auto position, straight up and down. And if you click 1, 2 to the right, you'll be on the start time function. 1 more click, 3 to the right, you'll be on runtime. It's pretty, no matter whether you have Irritrol, Toro, the brand, Weathermatic, they're all pretty similar. The start time, runtime function is usually located in that spot on your controller. The language just may be a little bit different. So this is an example, just to help you better understand what I'm trying to relay here. Let's say you have 5 zones that we want to water for 12 minutes each, beginning at 6 in the morning. So again, as I've already stated, your start time should be 6 a.m. So you go to that position on your dial, you set it appropriately for 6 a.m. And then when you turn your dial one more position to the right is where you're going to control your run time per zone, which in this scenario would want to be 12 minutes. So if you do 5 zones beginning at 6 a.m. at 12 minutes a zone, you have 60 minutes of total runtime. So theoretically, if you're programming this correctly, then your system should be done watering by 7 a.m. because that's just an hour total of time. If it's watering well into 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, beyond 6 to 7 window, then you know that something's not quite right in your programming, and you want to go back and reassess to make sure you do that correctly. Another thing that I get quite a bit that we hear is my water bill is high. And sometimes that's a mainline leak. That's definitely can be an issue here with some of the terrain, rocks and stuff that could crack your PVC. But that's not always the case. The assumption that we have a leak because my bill is high is not always true. So what could be the culprit, or what is usually the culprit? And what we find more often than not is that they actually have multiple start times, and they don't realize they do because they don't fully understand their controller appropriately. Or it was programmed incorrectly by someone that has come claiming to understand their controller previously. So my advice to them is to not have multiple start times. And there are exceptions to this. And one example I'll share for an exception is, say you're installing a new landscape and you're putting in a lot of grass. You're sodding your yard, and whether it's multiple pallets or just a couple, you may want to water it, especially in the summer months, twice a day. So if that's the case, then you would want to have multiple start times. You want to have one in the morning or one in the evening, or however you want to break that out. But that's really one of the few scenarios where you would want to take advantage of your timer's capability to have multiple start times. Aside from that, it's really not necessary. It gets confusing really fast for a lot of people. So to keep it simple, our recommendation is always to not have multiple start times. Just choose when you want it to come on, have the one, and let it do its thing when it comes on at the time you schedule it for. Otherwise, you'll get into some issues, and your bill could be high as a result of multiple start times. Like the lady that I mentioned, she had 4 of them going in, and her bill consequently was pretty high because she had 4 times the water that she needed. So one of the things that Becky had asked me to talk on some was mitigating runoff. And I know this is becoming a increasingly talked about issue, and one that is not necessarily new to the area because the terrain of the hill country has always lent itself to runoff, especially in good deluges and heavy downpours. But as far as what we do with runoff and how to mitigate it, or how to lessen its effects in a negative way, that conversation is gaining a lot of momentum and steam. And so I'm going to offer just a few very broad, vague ideas as possible solutions to help with that as it relates to your system. And obviously stormwater retention is a little different, but for the purpose of our talk today, we're going to just specifically focus on the irrigation piece. And so the first thing that I want to mention as a way to mitigate runoff is to water during what's called the water window. And this is actually a term that is pretty common in the irrigation industry. We learn it when we go do our required hours and classroom work and stuff prior to taking the exam. But it's the hours of 5 to 7 a.m. in the morning is what they call your water window. And there's a couple of reasons why they refer to it as your water window. Obviously, you could water prior to or after. I realize systems are large and they can't always fit within that 2-hour block. But generally, if you can, having them water between those hours is helpful, primarily because obviously the sun is not quite up. So there's not a loss of water due to evaporation. And then also the wind is generally at its lowest first thing in the morning. So depending on your setup of your system, what kind of heads and nozzles you have, some of those can resist wind better than others, and some of them quite frankly can't. So if the wind is even minimal, it can really distort your water pattern and carry it into places that it otherwise shouldn't be. So again, all things being equal here, I realize that most of you may have, a 3, 4, 5 zone system, and maybe you can fit it into a 5 to 7 a.m. window. But for those of you that maybe don't, maybe you have a larger landscape or needs that would extend beyond that 2-hour block, you can carry it over, but I would recommend starting at least as much of your watering cycle as you can earlier rather than later, just for that purpose of the sun not having to fight it with evaporation and the wind being usually pretty low first thing in the morning. And we're talking about mitigating runoff. It's also important to know your soil type. I've included a pretty interesting diagram here on the right, this triangle with different soil makeups, and the 3 primary ones here being clay, sand, and then loam. So here in the hill country, I know there's a lot of rock, caliche, and things of that nature, but there's also been a lot of, manipulated areas, especially in newer construction homes where they've, brought in a sandy loam, or they've brought in a more heavy clay as kind of the foundational layer for some sod, or even if they're just seeding, trying to establish some native grasses and whatnot. So it's not always true that there's going to be, bedrock or even a nice thick caliche layer to contend with. But in irrigation across the board, no matter where you're at in the state of Texas or anywhere else in the United States, you're going to encounter a variation of these 3. Sand obviously being the most coarse, and then you come down to sandy loam, which is used a little more often in landscape for residential purposes. And it's more of a moderately coarse texture than a true sand would be, very, very coarse. Your loam is kind of the middle grade here. And then when you get in between clay and loam, you start to transition over to a finer texture, with clay being the finest. So knowing your soil type is really important, and we're going to dive into why that's important here as we continue on in this conversation. But really you want to start here, because if you don't know what kind of soil you're working with, even if it's just a few inches, 2, 3, 4, 6 inches, whatever that depth is, it does matter, and it is going to affect how much water can actually absorb into your property, your landscape, and how much is just going to run off and be wasted. So in addition to knowing your soil type, you also want to know your infiltration rate. And this is a graph here that's reflective of the 3 soil types we just talked about: clay, loam, sand. And you'll see that the sand actually has the highest infiltration rate, with the clay having the least. And the graph reflects that there. But this is also synonymous with the term absorption rate. If you hear that talked about, that's what they're referring to. And basically, in the simplest way I can define this, it's the rate at which a given soil type will receive or accept the water. So obviously, these 3 soil types cannot all receive water in the same way. They're different in the rate at which they can receive it, and therefore use and maximize it. So knowing which type you have will help you to determine the infiltration rate of that particular soil, and therefore how much water would need to be applied in a given run cycle on what you're trying to send water to. So here's a rough, kind of generalized measurement, if you will, of the infiltration rate of these different soil types. And this is measured in millimeters per hour. Again, I already said sandy soil has the highest infiltration rate at about 30 millimeters an hour. Loam is going to follow that, kind of in the middle, about 10 to 20. And the clay soils are going to be at the bottom with about 1 to 5 millimeters per hour. Clay obviously having the lowest infiltration rate. And one reason why people tend to use more of a sandy loam as their base for specifically a lot of sod installations is it does tend to hold the most available water for your plant material. So finding that good mix of soil type for what you're going to be, what the end goal is, whether that's, shrub beds or native plants or sod or seed or combination of all the above. You want to know what the foundation of those particular plant materials is going to require in order for them to thrive and flourish here. If you have clay, you're going to really be fighting to get the water down where it needs to get. And if it's sandy, it may just flow right past where it needs to go. So knowing this, it can be helpful as far as designing your landscape from the get-go, a beginning brand new construction project, or even doing an overhaul, coming in, amending areas and trying to bring improvements in that way. So the application rate, we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talked about infiltration rate, the absorption rate, and now application rate. And this verbiage can get a little confusing, but this is now talking about what the sprinklers themselves do. And it's also called the precipitation rate. So if you are looking at a catalog for a manufacturer of a certain product that you have in your irrigation system, whether that be a rotor head, a spray head, even a drip tubing, they will have in there exactly how much water is being applied through that given head for a set period of time. And so the rate at which water is being applied at a given head is usually measured in inches per hour. The only exception to that is drip irrigation, which is measured in gallons per hour because it's such low volume, instead of inches per hour, which is what rotors, spray heads, high efficiency nozzles, all the other irrigation would fall into inches per hour, but the drip is going to be gallons per hour. And so you'd want to ask yourself, familiarize yourself with your system. If you don't know what you have, it'd be good to go outside and just do kind of a general audit, like not even having to figure out how much water is being applied by using the catch can. You can just go turn on the zone and then identify, is that a rotor head? Is that a spray head? You can look on top and it'll sometimes, if the heads are not too worn, it'll tell you the nozzle size. You can determine all that information with really very minimal work. And then once you have that pinpointed for your specific system, you can then go to the appropriate catalog of the manufacturer and find out exactly what that precipitation or application rate is for the heads you have in your various zones. And the reason this is important is because they all apply water at different rates. And that kind of sounds redundant, but people seem to not know this. They just assume that a sprinkler is a sprinkler and it, it shoots water out and that's what it's supposed to do. And that's not completely true. It does matter. So determining what you have, where you have it, how many of them you have can all be very helpful. Also to mitigating runoff, so you know exactly how much to apply, when to apply it, when to stop applying it so that you don't begin to waste water. All those things come into account when you're talking about application rate. So I get this question posed to me quite a bit. Like, what's the right amount of time to water for my system or for a given zone? And this is really the answer. The proper watering time is what's going to suffice for the needs of your landscape while not surpassing or exceeding the soil's infiltration rate. So finding that medium, wherever it is, of when does my soil stop receiving the water, that's when any water applied beyond that point is wasted because it's not being taken in by the soil, therefore it's running off. And maybe it's not running all the way down the hill and causing severe erosion, but it's still being wasted. So determining the right amount of time to water, it's not a general, 20 minutes, 3 days a week, for every single irrigation system in town that's residential. Although they would apply water, it's not really going to solve or fix any potential issues related to, brown spots or whatever the problem may be. So knowing what your soil type is, what kind of heads you have that are going to be applying the water, and then determining your infiltration rate is going to help you to find that magic number of the right amount of time to water, both per zone and consequently per your entire run time for your complete cycle, start to finish. Here's a picture on your left of a rotor head. A picture on your right is kind of a traditional spray head with more of a fixed nozzle. Does that fan pattern that you see there. We just talked about application or precipitation rate. And in parentheses here, I have the application rates for both types of heads here. So for the rotor head, generally speaking, it's about 1/2 inch of water per hour. For the spray head, the one on your right, it's, as you can see here, it's about 3 times as much per hour. So you can see why it matters knowing, do I have a spray head or do I have a rotor or do I have some combination of the above or something completely different, because they do not apply water at the same rate. And therefore you could be wasting a little or a lot, depending on your setup and how long you've been running your system for. Here's another slide just with 2 pictures. The one on your left is a high efficiency nozzle. It actually comes out of a spray head, just like the one before. The spray head was on your right, and it said it applied water at 1.5 inches per hour. All we've changed in this picture here on your left is the nozzle, the part that the water actually comes out of. So the multi-streams you see happening, that's the change here. And you notice how drastically it reduces the application rate from 1.5 inches an hour down to less than 1/2 inch an hour, 0.4 inches roughly. It's generally, I think it's actually closer to 0.39. But it's quite the reduction, and that, therefore that's why they're termed high efficiency nozzles. Then on your right is kind of a standard drip tubing with a built-in emitter. This is again a generalized number, but roughly 0.9 gallons per hour is going to be their application rate. They make drip tubing that also can do 0.6 inches per hour, or excuse me, 0.6 gallons per hour, in addition to the 0.9. That's kind of the 2 standard numbers, 0.6, 0.9, for the tubing that has the built-in emitters. Obviously, drip irrigation in and of itself is very vast, and there's all kinds out there, so the application rate is going to vary depending on the product you're using. But for tubing such as this that you see before you with the built-in emitter, it's either going to be 0.6 or 0.9 gallons per hour. And like I said earlier, it's not measured in inches per hour just because it is such low volume and puts out very, very little water from that emitter. This is another common problem that we encounter quite a bit, and we do a lot of repairs, and we like that. We love the challenge of coming behind and repairing existing systems. But one thing we see a lot is that there's different types of heads with different application rates on the same zone. And knowing what you know now, based on what I showed you a few slides prior, is if you had a rotor head and a spray head and a high efficiency nozzle all on the same zone, then you would have one head putting out 0.5 inches of water per hour, 1/2 inch, another one putting out 1.5 inches an hour, and the last one, the high efficiency, at about 0.4 inches per hour. Believe it or not, I have seen that not just one time, I've seen that multiple times, those 3 types of heads and nozzles on the same zone. You really want to avoid that if at all possible. If you have that on your existing system, it's not the end of the world. You can retrofit it and achieve what is called distribution uniformity, meaning you want to put the same type of head with the same type of nozzle across that given zone. So if you have a zone that is a little bit wacky, it can be fixed. And it doesn't require retrenching or anything like that. You can just swap heads and nozzles and make it right. But absolutely do not do this, because that will lead to runoff faster than anything else. And we do see this a lot. And what it also will cause is overwatering of one area and severe underwatering of another. And that's going to obviously cause brown patch, or very dry areas, whether Bermuda, Zoysia, St. Augustine, whatever your grass is, native, otherwise it's still going to cause problems. So you want to have the uniformity where you know how much water is being applied at each head through each nozzle consistently across the zone. It's not a good idea to mix and match. And I've also seen a drip tubing tied in to a zone that had the rotor, the spray head, and the high efficiency nozzle. I've seen a drip tubing paired off of that too, and I just couldn't believe it, but it happens. So if that's you or someone you know, just reassure them it's not the end of the world. It can be fixed. But I would definitely not encourage you to continue to water with that kind of a setup, and not expect to see some kind of runoff result as a result of that issue. So talk a little bit about evaporation. I'm going to build up here to talk about transpiration and then also PET here in a little bit, but it's just the natural process of changing water into vapor. Obviously, the solar energy is a huge part of this. It's water that's evaporated from the soil. And this is, again, why we encourage the watering window. The sun isn't up, therefore you're not fighting evaporation as much. It will still happen when the sun rises and does its thing as it moves through the sky. In a given day, you will still have evaporation, but the water that you've applied during the watering window will have had a better chance to absorb and not be fighting the sun in the process. So evaporation is something that we take into account here, as well as transpiration, which is just the process of plant material giving off vapor, or water vapor from their leaves. These two things coupled together give us what's called evapotranspiration. And it's the combination of the two, the water that's evaporated from the soil and transpired from the plant material. And this is actually the total amount of water that you want to use as a good rule of thumb for plant growth. And believe it or not, Texas A&M has put out a resource that you and I can access on this at the website that is listed right here in front of you. And it tells you your potential evapotranspiration rates for your area. And so what you can do with that knowledge is you can, again, know not only when to water, but how long to water for your plant material. And I would encourage you to go to the site, visit it, familiarize yourself with the rates for our area, because it will affect the performance of your system overall and help to mitigate runoff when you know exactly how long you need to be applying water for and how often. So just real quick, talk about slopes. Obviously, there are different types of grades of slopes here, from a little to a lot and very steep to very minimal. Goes without saying that slopes can present some very real challenges for mitigating runoff that wouldn't otherwise exist. And the best way to navigate those challenges is understanding what's called capillary action. In irrigation, we just refer to this as the horizontal movement of water. Each of the soil types that we mentioned earlier has a different horizontal movement of water. Just like they have a different absorption rate, they have a different rate at which the water can move laterally on their surface. So this is especially important for drip. Drip irrigation, it's going to help you to determine how tightly you need to space your rows of tubing. And as you see here on this next slide, the three soil types, this is, again, a rough average of their horizontal movement in feet when applied over an hour. So sand, you're going to get about 1 to 3 feet of movement laterally, loam 2 to 4, and clay 3 to 6. And if you go back and you remember, because sand was more coarse and it had the highest infiltration rate, most of the water is going down. Therefore, there's not as much to move laterally. But you get down to clay where it's more dense, not as much is being absorbed. Therefore, there's more to move laterally on top of your soil type. So capillary action, just a horizontal movement of water. These are kind of the barometers for the three soil types and the rate at which they're going to move per hour. So really a good solution when it's appropriate for non-turf areas is to use drip. You can see here in this picture that this is obviously a sloped area along a highway, and they use drip tubing to water these hedgerows or shrub rows. You could also use the high efficiency multi-stream, multi-trajectory nozzles if you have, like, say, a turf on a slope. They're actually a really great resource for that purpose because they apply water at the 0.4, the 0.39 inches per hour, as we had touched on earlier. Because they apply water at a much lower rate, it's not as easily lost to runoff, and it's more, there's a much better absorption of that water that's being applied, and therefore a better maximization of that water. Drip is obviously the most efficient when it comes to slopes, but if that's just not feasible for your application that you're trying to water on a sloped area, then I would definitely recommend doing some kind of high efficiency setup. And it's important to remember that when you have a slope, you want to have your heads perpendicular to the slope. That helps for the overall application of the head and the streams coming from it to apply water appropriately. If you don't position the head in a perpendicular manner, then you can actually cause some runoff issues due to erosion, and the head will just beat into the hillside, and it'll cause a little cutout if the head's not positioned appropriately, and it'll start to erode that area, and with time that area will grow. So knowing how to position heads if you're using heads on the slope is very important. But again, drip is going to be the standard kind of go-to for any sloped area that needs to be irrigated. So I hear this also. I want to just kind of touch on this briefly, that we get calls that say my zone won't turn off or my zone's stuck on or something like that. Just kind of want to diagnose this with y'all here today, what possible problems could be, so that you don't have to call us or another irrigator to come out and fix the issue for you. So you could have a piece of debris that's stuck within the valve, and that piece of debris, it could be extremely small, can be enough to keep it stuck open. Obviously larger particles can get stuck in there too, rocks and other stuff, but I've seen some very, very, very small, almost needle-like debris have a valve stuck open and not allow it to fully close. You could also have a faulty diaphragm that doesn't seat properly and fully close, and it's basically like a plunger. When the solenoid receives signal from your timer, it'll cause the valve or the body inside to lift the diaphragm. When that plunger lifts and it goes to retract and to seat, when the zone turns off, if the diaphragm is faulty or has a crack in it or a fracture, then it won't sit well and it won't fully close, and therefore water will continually be passing through it. And then lastly, it could be a faulty connection either at your solenoid, which is the part of your valve that has wires running from it back to the timer, or it could be your timer sending a false signal to the valve, causing it to stay stuck on. I don't see that super often, but it does happen. And generally that can be troubleshooted from the timer itself using a multimeter and knowing a little bit of loose electrical terminology. You can usually figure out if there's too much voltage or even a short. I've seen a short cause a valve to stay stuck on because it was essentially doing a false signal. So those are usually your three places to start. I've never seen a valve have an issue unrelated to these three things. So if it's not any of these three, then it could just be the body itself is cracked, and that's the very bottom of your valve. As you uncover your box and you look in there, you do some probing. The body is the very, very base of your valve, and it can crack. I've never seen it, but it's just plastic most times. So having a crack in your body or the body of the valve is not out of the realm of possibility. So then we also hear a little bit of my zone won't turn on. It's not that it won't turn off, it just won't turn on. Some possible problems related to this issue are going to be you have a broken wire somewhere between that valve and the timer. And even if it's not a complete break, enough of a nick in that wire will cause it to not function. You could also have a faulty connection at the valve or at your timer. At your valve, you're going to have 2 wire connections. One's going to be your hot wire and one is going to be your common wire. And if either of those connections is not intact or secure, then your valve is not going to work. Or at the timer, if your terminal connecting your wire to your timer is loose, your valve is not going to work. And then lastly, it could be that your solenoid is faulty, the coil is burned out. Generally, that's what's going to happen. Or there's a little exhaust port that sometimes needs to be cleaned. You simply remove the solenoid and take a very small, like pin-like hole, and you clean it with either a small flag, or we'll use an irrigation flag, and we'll flush it of any debris that may be in the way. Or you could use a pin, you could use a needle, something real small to clean that exhaust port before replacing your solenoid altogether. And if the cleaning that exhaust port doesn't work, then you would need to replace the solenoid and then make new connections with both your hot and your common wire. I wanted to also touch briefly on just some recommendations that I would present to you as ways to optimize your system. And again, I realize that probably, maybe not all of you have a system, and that's okay. But for those of you that do, or maybe ones that are considering having a system of your own, this is just some information that I would suggest as a way of optimizing your system here in the whole country. Are you adjusting those watering times appropriately? Obviously, different times of year, different seasons need different things. And we're transitioning from summer to fall now, and the needs of landscapes here in the summer are generally speaking not the same as when we transition into the fall or winter or spring. So adjusting the watering times appropriately is important. What type of heads do you have? I know I already said this earlier, but identifying what you have is super helpful in determining how they apply water. What are those application rates? How much water is coming via those heads, those nozzles for the time I've been watering? You know, have you been using just a flat 30-minute parameter as you're watering per zone? You know, do that math. How much water is coming out of this zone over 30 minutes of time? Is that too much? Is it too little? All of that can be done by you with some simple math and knowing what your application or your precipitation rate is of those given heads and nozzles. Then you can also check the filters, the nozzles, and the drip tubing for any scale buildup. We live in the hill country, it's hard water here, and generally once a year, annually should be sufficient for this, but it's something you can do. You can just disassemble the nozzle, pull the filter out, look at it. If there's nothing, no buildup there, then you're probably fine to just reinsert that filter and screw the nozzle back on. But if there is some buildup, then that might be a good indicator that you need to check all of your nozzles on all your heads, because if there's buildup in one place, there's probably going to be buildup in others, and that can begin to distort your pattern, your nozzle pattern, whether it's the spray heads that do more of the fan or the rotors that do the larger, longer streams. All those patterns can be distorted if there is buildup. And obviously with drip tubing, because it's such a small hole where the emitters are, it doesn't take much scale, much buildup there for those to cease to work. There is products available that you can put in line with your sprinkler system that can eliminate scale in your lines. And it's a product that our company is going to begin to offer here in probably the next month or so. If you have a question about that or interested in that, I'd be happy to visit with you more about that post this presentation. But there's products like that out there that are available that can make the annual checkup essentially irrelevant if you had that in place. Some further ways to optimize your system, I would say identify and locate all your zone valves. So you're going to have a valve, say you have 10 zones, you're going to have 10 valves. The number of zones dictates your number of valves. Identify and locate those are typically would be in the green circular box, 6-inch in diameter. Occasionally they'll be in what's called a manifold where there's multiple valves in one spot. And if that's the case, the box will be larger. It could even be rectangular. But you want to identify those. You want to check them to make sure the wire connections are sound. We see all kinds of really funky connections. They're not always that great. You really don't want to use electrical tape. Some people think that that's kind of standard practice, and it's really not, or it shouldn't be. You want to have something that's a better protection for your connection. And we use grease tubes to cover over our wire nuts, make sure the connection's secure that way to prevent anything from coming in, contaminating or breaking it loose. But check those often. Well, once a year would be sufficient, but check them to make sure that they're intact, that they're sound. And if they need to be reconnected, just make a simple reconnection and you'll save yourself the headache of a zone not working in the near future. And then lastly, have your backflow prevention device tested annually. Most people don't realize that this is actually something that the state of Texas TCEQ mandates. Now, do they do a very good job of enforcing this? Not so much, but it is mandated in the irrigation code in the state of Texas to have your backflow tested annually. And this is good just as a safety protocol for your home or wherever your irrigation system is to prevent, cross-contamination back into your main house supply. You want to make sure your backflow is preventing that from happening. And if it's not, then obviously you want to have your backflow replaced, and much better to do that than to have some kind of medical issue result as a way of contamination down the road. So I kept this kind of vague, kind of short. I wanted to leave ample time for lots of Q&As and just be available for you guys and your questions. And I know we could talk for hours and hours about irrigation in so many different directions, but I just really wanted to give you guys a chance to share this platform with me, ask me questions, and if there's something that I either can't answer or don't feel I have the appropriate answer for right now, I'd be happy to write down your question and get back to you with a better answer, obviously post this presentation. But if there's anything I can answer right now while we're on this platform together, I'm happy to do it. And then Becky will transition here once the Q&A is done into the tour, virtual tour of the EduScape, and you'll see in there some of our work in regards to the EduScape there at UGRA. We partnered with them and doing the rain garden last year, and then have done a little bit of troubleshooting on the irrigation system. But you'll notice they have some high efficiency nozzles on their sprinkler system, and they also have drip tubing, two of the things I touched on earlier in this presentation. So some of that may be visible to you here in a little while if you stay on for the tour. But otherwise, I'm happy to field questions at this point. And I'll provide my phone number. Actually, I meant to put that on here, and I see that that's not here, but let me go ahead and give that to you guys for anyone that wants it. It's area code 830-496-1680. And I'm happy to field questions personally via my phone if you have any after we get off. Or my email is beyondirrigation@gmail.com. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Becky and let her open up the floor for some questions here.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Travis. I mean, some really good information. We do have a couple questions that folks had written into the chat. And Ron and Janice were curious as to what is the best way to water established young trees in a non-turf area? Sprinkler head or drip or placement? Just can you address that?
Non-turf area, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. I would recommend a bubbler, an adjustable bubbler, or even a couple, depending on the maturity of the trees. You say young. Young could mean a couple days, could mean a couple years, So depending on the maturity of the tree, and the extensiveness of the root system currently would, to me, determine the need for the irrigation type. And I would definitely go with a bubbler, an adjustable bubbler, not like a flood bubbler, because I think you can definitely put too much water on trees, and I've seen that cause rot and other disease-related issues by putting too much water. But I would prefer an adjustable bubbler just because you can control how much water is coming out of those bubblers as opposed to a fixed bubbler that doesn't have that same capability.
Great. And then we've got another question from Tara. Does anything need to be done to winterize your irrigation system in our area where it rarely freezes?
Great question. Great question.
Putting up
Yeah.
Travis's contact information too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So winterizing your system, unless you have pipes that are exposed, meaning above ground, I don't think it's necessary. We don't have a true permafrost layer here. You go further west, like Lubbock, Midland, Odessa, for sure, Amarillo, where they have to, by local ordinance, put their pipes 3 feet in the ground. Here, 6 inches is plenty. It's really that radically different. So I would say no to the winterization. You don't need to flush your lines. You don't need to do any of that. You could turn it off, or I even, off altogether. You could shut your backflow down. That'll cease the water flow through your lines of your irrigation system. Just do a simple turn of one of those check valves. Or you could run it periodically. When I say periodically, maybe once every 2 weeks, just briefly, to keep everything functional through the winter. That's also an option. But unless there's a pipe that's actually exposed to the elements, or if it's a mainline pipe, meaning it's under constant pressure at all times, then, and it's exposed, absolutely wrap that, protect it, because it will crack even in the freezing weather we have here. But if it's not pressurized, if it's just a line that receives water when a zone runs, then really I wouldn't recommend taking crazy precautions to protect it, because it should be just fine.
All right, there's Mark wants to know, should trees be on a different zone than the lawn?
If your trees are in the middle of a lawn, I'm going to say no. And the reason I'm going to say no is for the purpose of, you can actually put too much water on the trees. And I've seen it happen where there's been specific, whether it's a bubbler or a drip irrigation, kind of the tubing I showed earlier that has built-in emitters, and there is a zone specific to trees within a turf area. The trees have actually not really thrived, in my opinion. And I don't claim to necessarily be a tree expert, but the people I know here that do specifically work on the overall health and integrity of trees have told me quite often that they encounter a lot of related issues to overwatering. And I think the overwatering can be avoided or minimized by not putting the extra zone on your trees. People want to overreact to me. Oh, it needs a lot of water, and that's not always true. So it can be done right, but I would propose to you that if you're going to install a turf area or trees within a turf area, that maybe you should know the requirements of the turf area and pair trees that are going to plant trees, that are going to pair well with that turf, and not plant St. Augustine, that needs a lot of water with a tree that really requires very little, because those are obviously in conflict with one another. So I would just recommend pairing your turf requirements with, a tree of comparable standing. All
right. Just trying to right now get our gallery view back up, but if anybody has questions, let's go ahead and unmute yourself and fire away with those questions. Nope.
You guys are coming off easy. I appreciate that.
No. Well, Travis, I mean, we've got your contact, information, and I'm sure, if anybody's feeling a little shy and they'd rather ask their questions one-on-one,
Yeah,
you entertain that.
I would.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right, awesome. So let's go ahead and let's see here. Yeah, it doesn't look like there we go. All right, I'm learning the ropes, folks. Finally get to see, all the windows. So if there are questions, then let's go ahead and thank our friend here, Travis Pflughaupt, sorry, from Beyond Irrigation, and we'll transition to the virtual tour of the EduScape. So Tara's saying thank you, and I think we all can say thank you. And all right, yay!
I'm gonna tap out and let you guys enjoy the tour with Becky, but I have another appointment here shortly I need to make. So just want to say thank y'all. I enjoyed it, and hopefully you guys gleaned a little bit of helpful information from my talk.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And, when it starts hiding stuff from you, there we go. All right, just as a reminder, we've had several really good talks in this EduScape virtual talk and tour series. And so the next and final for this year lineup is on the 29th. And that's going to be with Dr. Becky Bowling, and she is from the AgriLife Water University up in Dallas. She's going to be talking about soil management. Travis got to, he did bring up, quite a bit about soil, but this is going to be, much more in-depth. Talking about soil management and things that you can do to improve your soil, to improve the infiltration of the water, either rain or sourced through irrigation. So that's next, I think that's next week, but either way, it's the 29th. Go to riversidenaturecenter.org and be sure to register for that. All right, so the UGR EduScape. If you haven't, like I said earlier, if you haven't had an opportunity to visit this in person, really recommend that you do. This project all began, as I said earlier as well, to correct some major erosion and runoff issues around the UGRA building. Creating this landscape served more than just aesthetics. It really was a landscape with purpose. And therefore, that's why the nomenclature was coined EduScape, and so educational, landscape. Within this landscape, excuse me, there's over 15 different stormwater detention. Sorry about that, folks. Over 15 different stormwater detention and water conservation principles that are demonstrated. And what makes it interesting is that this demonstration balances the two extremes that an urban environment often finds itself in, and that is one, drought, and then the opposite, flood. So we know that all too well here in Texas. Based on an average rainfall over 1 year time, the folks at UGRA is estimating that this landscape can also absorb about 1 million gallons of rainwater. So pretty efficient. So one wonderful thing about doing this virtually is that we get to see, some before and after pictures. So this slide here just kind of gives you a rundown of the development of the landscape starting back, and then now in 2019 actually doing public tours. And I sure wish we were doing a public tour right now, but like I said, the advantage of doing a virtual is we get to see some befores and afters. So we'll just run through a couple of these slides real quick. This is obviously a before, and now we can see drastic change. Out in the parking lot, looking from the front entrance, and then what it looks like now. Over to the side of the front entrance. Some nice shrubbery now, before, after. And then just this vast monoculture, lawn before. And now look at the huge difference. This is on the back side of Lehman Drive. And that leads us back around to the entrance of the parking lot. So, as I said earlier, there's, about 15 different combinations of landscape techniques in this one landscape. It's not something that, you're normally going to find in, one's home landscape or a business landscape. And that's not the intention of this. I mean, this is an educational tool. And what we're hoping is that the public will be able to, pick and choose, some different techniques that are going to be useful to you or to a business in their particular landscape needs. And so it can look a little disjointed, but that's by design. So our first stop is at the welcome sign. These, the signage, there's about 10 interpretive signs throughout the landscape. And what's really cool is that in person, you can just take your cell phone, put it up to that QR code, and it will pop up a lot more information than just what's on the sign itself. But right now, if you're not going to be there in person, you can go to the UGRA website and go under major initiatives, go to EduScape, and all of this information is available to you for further study. So we'll come up to the second interpretive sign, and of course we're going to focus on the Guadalupe River. This is, one of our primary education objectives is to build awareness of the unique relationship between Kerr County and the Guadalupe River, being that western Kerr County is the headwater. And so this intersection of geology and topography is responsible for the flow of the river that we rely on so heavily, not only, for sustenance, but for healthy, recreation and aquatic life and of course, water supply. So here we have, right there at the beginning is this wonderful fountain. Well, or kind of, it's very nice and it's very pretty, but it's also, depicting and illustrating Guadalupe River actually, originate. I mean, it's the stone and surfacing at the top through seeps. So we're going to move along. And the first big feature that we encounter is this wonderful water catchment system. This is a 30,000 gallon tank, and it is collecting water off the main, half of the main building's roof, and that's about 10,000 square feet. And so this is This is a wonderful system. Now it's non-potable. They are not using this, you know, inside for drinking water or anything. It's mainly well, its main purpose is for irrigation purposes. Um, we're going to see, you know, as we're moving along, how rainwater harvesting systems, you know, come in all big, you know, all different sizes and shapes and everything, from that big tank that we just saw, 30,000 gallons, to, you know, using a small tank or barrel that's only 50 gallons. And so as we progress along the walkway here, we're going to take a glimpse of one of the smaller barrels that are in use as well. So trotting along a crushed granite pathway, and we're going to talk further about the pathways throughout the landscape. But as we virtually stroll, take a look at your feet and realize what kind of surface you are walking along, and we're going to talk about that. But here is showing the use of native grasses on this stretch of the path. And native grasses, if you know, you've never looked at photos on the internet of how deep and how huge the roots are on these things, you know, three to four times what you see up on the surface is down below. And of course that is aiding in all the infiltration of the water down through, you know, the soil. And so here we've got a mix of different kinds of muleys. So moving along, again, let's look down at our feet. And once again, we are on a different path here, different surface. And again, hold that thought. We're going to talk about that. So you will see over to the left of us, just peeking around, is a little blue barrel connected to that shed. And we were talking about different water catchment systems. Simple 55-gallon drum with a rain chain, and it's collecting water off that utility shed, perfect for the need of just the plants that are right in that immediate area, you know, for hand watering. So you can have big, huge, you know, 30,000 gallon, you know, systems down to, you know, a 55. Some people even just use 35-gallon drums. So as we move along, we're coming up to our wildflower section. And again, wildflowers, native plants, you know, are excellent water conservers. I mean, they're using up the water that is available to them. And that very well may not be very much, but they are experts in water conservation. So we're seeing here the wildflower garden. This is maintained by the local hill country master naturalists, and they have put in a number of pollinator plants. And so subsequently, this has been given you know, some recognition as a pollinator garden through Monarch Watch and Wildlife Habitat. And this is just showing some more of the plantings with that are attracting our local pollinators. So as I said, you know, it is certified as a monarch way station, a wildlife habitat, because it is providing, you know, food, water, and shelter. And important, really important, is that the entire landscape, the entire EduScape was awarded in 2018 the Texas Water Development Board's Texas Raincatcher Award, and quite a prestigious award, and kudos to UGRA for obtaining that recognition. So we talked about looking down at your feet and seeing what you're walking on, you know, during this tour. It brings us to the next interpretive sign, and talking about pervious surfaces. Now, pervious meaning allowing water to infiltrate or allowing things to go through, as opposed to impervious. Oftentimes our roadways, sidewalks, these are all hardscapes. They're impervious to water. And so it was, of great importance to be able to provide, different examples of pervious surfaces throughout this EduScape. Crushed granite we walked on, the pavers that we walked on garden, you may not have noticed, but they were not with just sand in between them, allowed to infiltrate. So I'm okay. So we've got kind of a little technical difficulty here, and I apologize. Hopefully, we're not going to have too much issue with this. But I don't know if you can see it, but I'm getting a messages saying that we are got some problems, technical problems. So hopefully it will remedy itself. We shall soon see. So pervious surfaces, when we were looking back, were, I'm just going to stop sharing just for a sec, and then I'm going to go back and share again, and hopefully this will remedy an issue that is going on. Sorry about that, folks. It just, all right, so bear with me, and I do apologize. Okay, so hopefully we're back on track. So we're talking about pervious surfaces. These turf stones are another example of a pervious surface. And what we have here is just some gray granite stones, as an aesthetic contrast to the light concrete stone. Some people will use different plantings, mosses and turf to put in there as a living walkway, but they chose to do this, and it looks quite nice, and it's also serving a purpose. So throughout the landscape, there are, oh gosh, probably over 70 different species of plants that are on display, and each one have been labeled. So, this is a nice plant identification opportunity as well. And amongst those labels, there are 20 different water conservation tip little plaques. And so pick up little tips throughout the landscape as well. So what we're seeing here is a slope. And I just want to, draw your attention that from the back of the property down to the front, we're looking at, about a 20-foot drop. So you can imagine when this was just nothing but lawn, you get one of those big gully washers that we have, and all of that rain just, sluicing down and then crashing into the back of the building. So in order to mitigate that, some terracing was put in, of course, the vegetation planted, and then all along you see those stones and against the building, and that's a dry creek bed, and that is then funneling water to 3 different rain gardens that are at the termination of the dry creek beds. So, and here we have our number 10th, our 10th interpretive sign, and no, 6th, not 10th, I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. The 6th interpretive sign, and it's discussing dry creek beds. And again, you know, both functional and beautiful, just as the sign says. So dry creek bed here that's going underneath a walkway. And that's coming off of the side of the building where that main dry creek bed was against the building, and then running down into a rain garden. Now this is the back, and we were talking about, you know, terracing and all of these mitigation, you know, techniques that are putting that have been, you know, developed and put in the landscape. But, you know, again, we have every once in a while these just deluge of rain, and you know, it becomes overwhelmed. And so what do when you're designing your landscape? You want to design it for what is going to commonly happen, not for, you know, the extreme, you know, that's rarely going to happen. So unfortunately, back in May of this year, this is what was going on when we had those heavy downpours. But so it overwhelmed it slightly, but not disastrously. Again, you can see, you know, some standing water, but again, this water is being directed, you know, down to the rain gardens, and not just, you know, eroding away at the foundation of the building. So up back top, we've left our turf stone walkway. We're back onto a crushed granite walkway. This is a good opportunity for you to see. This photo was taken last year, and now, you know, just one growing season later, and you can just see, you know, how much these plantings have grown. Consequently, they're also providing a lot more roots, and so holding the soil together, and also blocking, you know, from that rush off of the road onto sliding down that slope. Just more plants and how well everything is growing. You can see it here through the terracing. Now, as we walk along, you'll see this back in the back of the building, and this garden is probably situated in the hottest part of the landscape. It just, you know, it gets inundated with sun, but that big giant Spanish dagger's been there for a long time and still does well. So instead of doing a lot of planting here, you know, chose to do more of a traditional xeriscaping with some interesting rock formations, and then utilizing, as you see, you know, in the pot, in the planter, some faux plants. And that's, you know, another way to conserve water, right, in your landscape. So lawns, there are 4 different turf plots throughout the landscape: St. Augustine, Bermuda, buffalo grass, and zoysia. And all 4 of these are more water conserving than other available turf, and maybe perhaps not native grasses, but our native grasses they're bunch grasses, and they're not going to form, you know, what we would call, you know, a lawn. You know, there's no reason for us to believe that, you know, you can't have, you know, a lawn. This landscape demonstrates that, you know, if done with the environment in mind, you're not going to plant, you know, a huge, vast, just monoculture, but you can put some turf in the area that is, you know, isn't so water thirsty, but yet it's going to provide that nice feel for, you know, the kids and the grandkids to be able to play on, and such. So done in small areas, when in combination with other landscape techniques, you know, there's no reason why not to use turf. So Another pervious walkway. Again, it's crushed granite, but it's on a slope. You might not be able to appreciate that here, but it is on a slope. And in order to keep that crushed granite in place, you know, big not pavers, but big stones were put in there. And so, you know, it's again, functional, but also pretty. So we come to probably one of my favorite parts of, well, technique or different water conservation demonstration, and that's the condensate. You know, water is constantly being generated through our air conditioning systems. And so the thing that's kind of cool about collecting your AC condensate is that, you know, when you need the water the most is when it's the hottest of the season. And so, you know, your AC's running, it's producing more water and you're collecting it. And so it's kind of a neat relationship there. Here at the UGRA, they installed a 3,000 gallon tank, and that's collecting all the water the condensate from the AC units up on the rooftop of the building. Again, like the water catchment systems, you can have big systems or you can have small systems. This is a 3,000 gallon. Now over at the hospital at Peterson Regional Medical Center, they have a system that stores up to 90,000 gallons in 3 different tanks. And so, you know how cold hospitals are. And so they're constantly collecting that, and they use that for their irrigation as well. The Kroc Center down on Holtzworth, they installed condensate collection systems, and they're able to, in the peak AC seasons, you know, summer, it creates about 2,500 gallons of water a day, and they use that for landscape irrigation as well. So, as I said, big systems, but then you can go down to just a 5-gallon pail, you know, collecting it and then using that for just, you know, some hand watering of a plant nearby. And so again, choose the size that fits your needs. So right in front of that tank is a rain garden that we're going to visit, and this just discusses a little bit more about the rain gardens and how they work. So this rain garden comes off, as we talked about, the dry creek beds on the back portion of the building, funneling that water down along the large stones and then down into this depression. The one thing that's real interesting about rain gardens is, you know, your plant selection. Of course, you would not want, you know, plants that, like a Blackfoot daisy, who hates to have their feet wet. So you wouldn't choose that kind of plant. You're going to choose inland sea oats, mealy blue sage. We've got some Texas sage there. All of these native plants, and they are tolerant of being having the roots really wet for a short period of time, and then, you know, being able to be dry for, you know, a longer period of time. So excellent rain garden selection there. So xeriscaping, and xeriscaping, not zero-scaping, like a lot of people go, oh, you know, and because it's people have a misconception of what xeriscaping is. In actuality, everything about this landscape is xeriscaping. It's you know, helping to mitigate runoff. It's using water wise plants and mixing hardscapes with vegetation. So, you know, just generally a very good concept for our area, especially here in Texas. Alluded to earlier, you know, using some artificial materials or, flowers and sculptures, just a little eye candy and a little pop of color. Why not? Why not? They're not using water. So you could, absolutely adopt something like this into your landscape. So xeriscaping, kind of what a lot of people, do have in their mind about that, the use of, agaves and succulents and cacti and things of that nature, yuccas. Here, it's a mix of a crushed granite with larger stones. So you have a little bit of a texture interest. So we're coming around the corner of the building. If you remember before and after pictures, this is where all the boxwoods were planted. And so now it's just sort of a demonstration of some container gardening. This is a plant, Candlia, that it's called. And so, just nicely spaced and just showing container gardening. This is behind a gate, so obviously the deer can't get to it, but this is an antique rose garden that's quite lovely and nice to visit. So again, kind of, perspective from last year to this year. This is along the front entrance. We're looking at the top of a terrace that was constructed in order to help with the infiltration of the water and decrease runoff right here. So again, I said condensate collection was one of my favorite, and I love this as well. It's a gabion wall, and it's building that terrace. This is what it looked like, when it was first put in this last year. And then look at now. I mean, the plants have grown. It's starting to cover the wall, and which I kind of like that. In some places it still peeks out and you can see it. The gabion wall is just an excellent technique, allowing the water to kind of stop there, infiltrate down, but then seep out horizontally to that next layer, that next terrace. So this is a kind of a bird's eye view of the landscape. You can see the dots are just the 10 interpretive signs, and you can see how the water, how it flows along the landscape. So we've addressed all of this flow, but there was a major problem or issue still that needed addressing down along the side. Couple rain gardens put in here, but it overwhelmed that and then comes down into the edge of the property. So in order to mitigate that issue, and Travis, from Beyond Irrigation earlier, mentioned it, but his company, with the help of the county, have installed along the red zone is a dry creek bed or a bioswale. That's another term. And then in the blue area is another rain garden. So that water's coming down into that rain garden, and as a kind of a last defense to before running off of the property. And as I said, UGRA partnered with Kerr County in order to dig that trench for the bioswale and rain garden. And then Travis's company, Beyond Irrigation, came in and did a layering of gravel, and then different textures of sand, dirt, and then on the top mulch. So you can see the dry creek bed on your left, and then on the right are some newly planted. This is a new feature to the landscape, to the EduScape. And so all the flags are indicating, different little plants. And so as seasons go, this is going to be, a lovely visual garden, but extremely, extremely functional as well. So that's concludes our tour of the EduScape. And again, really, really recommend that you take the opportunity to personally, go and visit the EduScape. It's 125 Lehman Drive, the Upper Guadalupe River Authority complex. And, there's no open or closed. It's all outside. It's self-guided. So, take your time and pick and choose some of these techniques that you may want to implement in your own landscape. So, if anybody has any questions, we can definitely address those. And it looks like we've got. Let's see. There were some. Okay, so Maura and Tara were talking, but awesome. So Tara has answered those questions, and if there's no further questions, no. Okay, just a reminder. Go to riversidenaturecenter.org and get registered for the last of this season's EduScape Talk&Tour, and that's again going to be soil management and water infiltration, improving that, and with Dr. Becky Grubbs out of AgriLife, A&M AgriLife. So, without further ado, I thank each of you for attending today. I do hope that you got some useful information, and we'll see you down the road. Thanks, everybody.